Let me now go to Sauvik and invite him for outlining his vision uh, in terms of the growth of energy consumption, how he would like the energy system to unfold in Ladakh. He has done an extensive study on the carbon neutrality of Ladakh, as I said, in at the behest of NIDI-IO. Sauvik, Mr. Sood talked about the optimal 250 megawatt capacity of power consumption, the power generating capacity for Ladakh, and 185 of wind, 185 for solar. How do you see these numbers, and whether these numbers match with your projections, and what are your recommendations in this regard? Over to you, Sauvik.
Thank you, sir. Distinguished fellow panelists. So just let me start sharing my screen.
Yeah, I'll come back to you, Mr. Sood. I think you have a point. Yes, I'll come back to you.
No, absolutely no. I was talking about something else. No,
okay.
Is my slide visible?
No, not yet. Yeah, you're on screen now.
Okay. Yes. So, so the presentation that I'm going to make today is drawing a kind of a lot of inputs on the recent work that Mr. Rashmi was referring to, which Terry conducted towards designing the strategy for a carbon neutral Ladakh commissioned by NITI-Aayog. Although it won't be possible for me to actually cover the different aspects of it, but at least some of the key elements in terms of where the consumptions would be in the near future, and some of the challenges that we foresee. And this is one of the first of such kind of an exercise undertaken, and there are a lot of opportunities in terms of improving upon it. And that is also a kind of an opportunity wherein we would like to understand your inputs and suggestions in terms of definitely making this transition more effective and win-win for all the stakeholders. So before going into the details of some of the key findings, I would like to just set the context, although like many of these issues are well known to the August audience, but at least just to kind of revisit some of the key elements. So if we look at the key issues when it comes to energy and environment, it is largely like the diesel gensets, which are meeting the energy demand, particularly during the winter seasons. And it has a lot of implications in the local black carbon emission. At the same time, there's a lot of like firewood, which is used for for cooking and heating. And we will see that the significant share of the use of firewood used for in the domestic sector and to some extent the commercial sector. Kerosene, as Mr. Sood had already mentioned, that kerosene has a huge consumption along with firewood in terms of largely the domestic energy requirement, apart from electricity lighting. When it comes to water, because the region has been experiencing a significant increase in the number of tourist footfalls, and a lot of commercial institutions and establishments in the form of hotels have come up in recent times. There's a lot of like groundwater withdrawal, and that has two impacts. In one, in terms of a kind of a less rationalized use of water, and at the same time that there's a lot of these pumps which are being currently used, which has significant energy implications. In the agriculture sector, we don't see so much of an impact, but definitely there are a lot of like sporadic, kind of different locations where the agricultural activities are taking place, although it's minimal. But yes, the use of chemical fertilizers as well as water in some of the regions are creating not a kind of a UT level problem, but definitely at a much local level problem. But more importantly, the challenge is the kind of like diversion of the agricultural land that we see, because between 1970 and 2010, we was looking at that almost like 5 to 7% of the neighborhood lands within in the key urban settings, particularly in Kargil and Leh, have been like brought in as a part of its overall development. Tourism and urbanization are some of the key aspects, but it has also implications when it comes to waste management, water supply, and more importantly, sewage water management. So that is an area which has significant water because of the aspect that water needs to be pumped in. At the same time, water needs to be maintained in a fluid state so that it can be supplied through pipelines to different households. And it is envisaged that with maybe more piped connection, possibly the dependence on groundwater withdrawal and the energy requirement that would be required in terms of extracting the water at different levels can be mitigated to a large extent. And finally, like as I mentioned, urban management between 2003 and 17, we have around 9,400 new buildings coming up, which has a significant impact not only on the built environment, on in terms of like the kind of materials that would have gone in terms of constructing and also bringing those materials from neighboring states. The embedded footprint in those materials definitely has a significant impact. And as we see, like with more such kind of institutions coming up, and addition to the overall floor space, it will definitely create a lot of like embedded carbon, but at the same time, a lot of waste being generated because of the demolition and new constructions. Now, with this perspective, we did this exercise to develop a kind of a carbon neutral and climate resilient strategy for the region that supports and balances the economic growth and social inclusiveness and preserves the rich ecological diversity. So the C's, some of the key sectors which we had focused on from the demand side, it was the residential, the transport, the commercial, and we have the urban, which in a way also captures the commercial, the defense sector, the agricultural sector, and the tourism sector. And then we have the kind of supply side. Obviously, there would be other supply which we have looked at, but definitely electricity is one of the key issues that we are discussing today, and also being an integral part of this transition. So these are the like kind of 7-8 broad areas that we have looked at. Unfortunately, in the region, the data is scarce, and any kind of like current assessment and future estimation is really challenging, because and with the new UT coming up, because earlier the data was like merged with the Jammu and Kashmir, but now really like kind of taking out the data from the existing Jammu and Kashmir state statistical yearbooks. So that was an initial challenge, but nonetheless, we could break it up to the extent possible where it was making sense, and extrapolating it for the next 30 years, because we have the time horizon till 2050. So we have two scenarios, as I mentioned, baseline scenario as well as the alternative scenario, wherein the baseline scenario, we are taking a kind of a bottom-up approach where we are looking at some of the based historical trends and some of the plans that have been identified. In the alternate scenario, it is more of an aggressive climate neutral scenario, where we have a hybrid bottom and top down approach, where the kind of assumptions we are using in terms of the neutrality is somewhat more, but realistic. But yes, at the same time, it is not really aggressive, like disruptive in terms of what we are discussing today, like a kind of 100% transition towards clean energy. And here still we see a kind of use of DG sets. And as I mentioned, that there's a lot of scope in terms of going even beyond this scenario to capture what Mr. Sood was referring to. Largely the population growth rates, the household growth rates, the rate of urbanization, the tourist footfalls, they are more or less the same across these two scenarios. But what changes in these two scenarios are the demand side management, although the supply side to some extent changes, at least in the electricity sector, where we are assuming a kind of a better utilization of the total renewable energy generation capacity in that region. Now, I don't want to go into the individual sectoral analysis, but to give you a kind of a feel in terms of where the demand and the supply are coming in terms of meeting the demand. in the 2-year phase, the 2019 as well as the 2050. So as we see that from the demand side, it is largely the residential sector, and this is primarily wherein we see the use of the traditional biomass and kerosene as major energy sources, and predominantly in the rural setting. This is followed by the urban sector as well as the defense sector, and that's a kind of an area wherein I think we need a kind of a little bit of discussion. I don't know to the extent possible that it addresses both the strategic as well as the environmental aspects. And if we look at the kind of contribution coming, it is largely the electricity sector, followed by the gasoline sector, and then we have the other sources including kerosene, diesel, LPG, and so on and so forth. LPG is a source of energy, at least in some of the households, but the connectivity is a major issue wherein most of the households of late, they have been given the permission to in fact order more than one cylinder, so that or two cylinders, so that at least the cost and the time, the lead time which is there in terms of delivering the cylinders in the remote locations get minimized, and they can order in advance. So the demand that we see in the year 2019 was around 9.3 petajoules, but it is going to increase to almost like 18 petajoules by 2050. And urban management or the urban sector would be the largest consumer of energy in the alternative sector, in the alternate scenario. Similarly, the kind of like energy which is expected to come under the alternate scenario, it is again the diesel. As you can see that the kerosene and other sources are falling, but diesel, why? Because here we are assuming that in the defense sector there are no transitions. So that's an area which possibly we can revisit, and we would be able to like in fact further reduce the overall carbon footprint in terms of making or greening the entire defense operations in that region. So if we look at the net GHG accounting, so we undertook a kind of an overall inventory assessment for across various sectors, and you can see that it's almost like 600 kilotons of emission which we see. But if we look at it from the perspective of growth, then by 2032, possibly the current carbon stock would be exhausted and it would be considered as neutral. So it's now carbon negative, we become like neutral by 2032, and then maybe beyond that one with no more initiative, it is definitely going to increase. But this one can consider that these are based on some past tense and certain assumptions. But that doesn't mean that situation may actually even deteriorate further, whether the kind of growth that we see between now and 2030 maybe even faster, and we can see the kind of neutrality achieving even before 2030. But nonetheless, this is a kind of an exercise to give a understanding that where we are and the kind of neutrality exists, and the tipping point, and when it goes off. And then we have the kind of like an aggressive carbon sequestration, wherein we have the alternate ways of increasing the overall future stock, which goes to almost like 1.9 to 2 million tons. But more importantly, the energy consumption in the economy, in fact, in the region, in fact, reduces significantly by almost 50–60% because of the various interventions that we are looking at. So it's the demand side management that we are largely looking at in the transport sector, in the agricultural sector, as well as in the residential sector. So even with these interventions, if we are able to really continue, then possibly the kind of scenario that we see is that it will remain to be as carbon neutral even till 2050. Now, then we identified like 5 major thematic areas of interventions, and I'm going to touch upon like some of them. And the first one being the hydrogen as a source of energy transition, particularly the green energy transition. So if we look at the use of green hydrogen that is produced locally, can be really promising from the perspective that it is local, as well as the cost would be very minimal, particularly when it comes to the fact that it is being generated through the green process, not the traditional the gray or the blue one that we quite often talk about these days. Further, there is a need for to explore that how it can be delivered at a kind of a least cost manner. And one of the best applications that we are looking at in the hydrogen sector is largely in the transport sector, and both in the civil transport as well as for the defense applications. Now, this is a big challenge in order to preserve the pristine and ecologically sensitive local environment. But given the limits of direct and electrification, particularly in remote areas, and the associated challenges of the maintenance, the green hydrogen has the potential to overcome some of the fundamental issues. In fact, better utilization of the biomass, maybe for other purposes, and definitely like in terms of addressing the ecological sanctity in the region. We do have the National Hydrogen Mission. There is this new National Biohydrogen Mission, which the Department of Biotechnology is talking about. So I think it provides a kind of a very unique opportunity to have both a central kind of a supply mechanism, but making maybe use of some of the traditional practices, including the dry toilets as a source of methane production, largely in the distribution. And if there is an opportunity for manufacturing hydrogen, even that is, but the scale definitely is an issue. But obviously that needs to be explored in terms of how it can be achieved. The second aspect is definitely we are talking about the electricity supply. So Ladakh has a very rich source of renewable energy. And as Mr. Sood mentioned, that it has a massive solar potential of around 60 gigawatt of solar, and 35 gigawatt in Kargil, in Leh, as well as 25 gigawatt in Kargil. So Ladakh has an annual average of like 325 days of sunny days, thus making it like one of the largest regions in the world having such high irradiation. So the Leh district, that was estimated to generate almost like 6 to 12 kilowatt hours per square kilometer, and the capacity utilization factor in the region can be easily assumed to be like double than what we normally experience in the region. And at the same time, the wind energy, although we haven't covered that one because of the fact that we got this understanding that the density is relatively less. But yes, discussion with some of the other stakeholders, we feel that wind has a lot of potential, and to the tune of 100 gigawatt. And definitely along the main transmission lines, if we are able to harness this entire wind and connect it with the transmission lines, and not only it can be utilized in meeting the requirements as well as exporting it to the other state. In fact, we have also considered storage of around 100 megawatt hour of electricity, and it makes appropriate sense in terms of even meeting the peak demand, particularly which is generated during the evening and early morning. So that can also be addressed. So back of the metering, which Mr. Sood was talking about, is also feasible in terms of ensuring that possibly a kind of local manufacturing can be established. There would be opportunities of using decentralized electricity access in some of the remote locations that might be almost 10% of the total households. But definitely, at least it would be better than the current model, because most of these remote households, they do have a solar panels, but because of poor maintenance, they are not able to really use it on a continuous basis. So there is therefore 1.5 years, and then it can kind of like it moves away because they move away again, like back to the traditional biomass, which is again like making no kind of sense so far the neutrality is concerned. In the transport sector, what we have assumed, as I mentioned, is the large electrification in the two-wheeler space, but in the four-wheeler space, but a combination of both electrification as well as hybrid. But in the light commercial vehicles, we are considering hybrids. But when it comes to buses, it is electric. But we need to understand that whether transforming from the current fuel mix to the electric mix and then going to the hydrogen mix, or directly like kind of leapfrog to hydrogen, makes more sense is something that needs to be studied in greater details. Well, some of the so that I mentioned about the transport sector. We do also have the interventions in terms of ensuring that how we are able to make agriculture having a very sustainable agricultural practices in Ladakh. Greenhouse effects are currently already in place, but there are incentive mechanisms that can be introduced to increased adoption of these practices, at least in some of the lower lying regions, which are like more conducive to and the environment is more conducive to agricultural practices. And then we have the climate resilient agriculture, but at the same time the urban development, because the solar passive heating, which is currently almost nil, but if we consider around 10 to 15% of the total built environment that will have solar passive heating, it is definitely going to have a huge impact on the overall energy demand in the region. And finally, we are talking about the adoption of sustainable tourism practices, because tourism is almost like 2 to 3 folds of the total population in the region. So it will definitely have a lot of impact in terms of not only the direct energy consumption, but also the indirect energy consumption through the water and other services that are provided to those people who are coming not only from India and outside. So let me end here, and I'll be more than happy, sir, to take any comments or questions for that matter. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sauvik, very much. This was an wide-ranging presentation covering a number of sectors, and you talked of a hybrid model of carbon neutral strategy, both bottom up and top down. In a way, this is a variation on what Mr. Sood earlier talked about, a combination of energy supply and demand management. Both have to be approached from the two sides to really to be effective. And I saw an important difference. Of course, I would like to discuss it towards the end, but you emphasized a multi-sectoral approach to focus on each sector, and it has its own peculiarities, particularities, and then develop solutions around that sector. You have talked of 6 important areas of intervention, but you did begin with hydrogen as the most important resource. Of course, you talked of renewables as well. Mr. Sood talked of renewables as the primary vehicle of this transformation, and he was emphasizing the battery, the storage. You have talked of an alternative fuel. So I do see a difference here in the approach, but we'll take it up towards the end. But this is interesting. Let me now go to Mr. Panda. He happens to represent the largest, one of the largest energy corporations in the country and perhaps in the world as well. And then it's very important that they have started diversifying into the area of renewables.